Good morning.
How's everybody this morning?
So far, so good.
Okay, see if we can make it even better. All right, we are on. I know a couple of people couldn't make it this morning, but we've got the recording, and everybody who's here is wonderful. So we're on Makkot Daf Yud Tet. Sorry again, if I could just ask people to mute themselves, and we don't have the echo. We're up to Makkot Daf Yud Tet. Maybe we'll just go back and do a little bit of a recap of what we started yesterday. I know it was slightly complicated. A couple of people told me they would appreciate just going through it again briefly. So just very quickly on Yud Chet Amud Bet, towards the bottom of the page. Again, we're going to continue dealing now in today's daf with the concept of Bikurim, talking about at length. Now, again, maybe one of the reasons this is, it's not that this is more complicated necessarily, but it's less familiar. When we deal with Orach Chaim, we deal with Hilchot Brachot, or even Hilchot Kashrut, whatever it may be. These are things which you're dealing with day in, day out. So as complicated as the concepts may be, it's probably easier to relate to them. Here we're dealing with Bikurim and Kodshim and all sorts of things which we've been talking about for a while. So less familiar, but nonetheless, we just hold tight. We'll be able to get through and to make sense of it all. So again, the main question which we're dealing with, and what we have been dealing with for the last daf or so, and we'll continue on to the next daf, is a person brings Bikurim to the Beit HaMikdash. Bikurim, the first fruits, right, of the 7 species. You bring them, and the Bikurim are given as a gift to Hashem out of recognition that the first fruits, the first of, all of my labor and toil, actually it comes up in this week's Parsha. I won't give the answer now, but I'll give the question. I'm sure you can all work it out. When the Torah talks about the Parshat HaMoadot, it goes through the different chagim that we have, right? It goes through Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and Pesach, Shavuot, Sukkot, etc., everything. In the middle, when we're talking about Shavuot, all of a sudden there is a gap. The Torah stops and it digresses, starts talking about the mitzvah of leket, shechicha, and payah, of the agricultural produce, that's what you have to give. That which you have to give over to the poor, not to keep for yourself. All of a sudden, why is that halakha? Why does it appear there in the middle of the parsha of talking about the chagim? Maybe part of the idea is that we talk about Shavuot, or we talk about there in the parsha of Shavuot, talk about receiving the Torah. Receiving the Torah is not just sitting in the Beit Midrash or when we're sitting in Shiur, but it's also a person is sitting in the field and a person is working, standing, exerting themselves in the field. That is the time when a person thinks more than any other, right? This is me. This is I should get everything. Why should I have to give any of it up? So it tells you even there you have to think about others. You have to think about the poor. You have to think about where all of this comes from. So here too, a person's first fruits, the farmer has toiled and labored over it. You have to remember, it's not just his, it belongs to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. In any event, so those Bikurim come to the Beit HaMikdash. They are holy. They are given over to the Kohen, and the Kohen is then allowed to eat them. Now, the question is, at what stage does this whole process begin? When does it kick in? At what point are we still talking about fruits which have a certain hekdesh status, which are not yet ready in the same way that you bring a korban? We've discussed at length. When a person brings the korban, you have to have zrikat adam first. For example, the blood has to be sprinkled on the mizbeach before whoever is allowed to partake of that korban is allowed to eat it. You eat too early, it's not allowed, even though you will later. Same thing with bikurim. Person brings their bikurim, gives them to the kohen, but they're not yet ready to be eaten, so the kohen can't eat them. Right? We'll talk as well about when the prohibition kicks in on the zar, on the non-kohen. But in any event, so what gets done? What takes place with those bikurim? 2 things that we've learned. One is that the farmer brings them and he has to make his declaration. He has to say the mikra bikurim, has to read the psukim. He also has to place them down, what's called anacha, place them down in front of the mizbeach. Right? And the question which we've been discussing for a number of days now, a number of shiurim, is which of those stages is what we call me'akev? which one of those stages had it not yet been performed, and the Kohen now comes and eats those Bikurim, would he receive Malkut? So one opinion says that it's the Mikra Bikurim. When they're reading those Psukim, if the person has not yet read those Psukim, then he would, at that point, the Kohen would get Malkut for eating the Bikurim. You have to wait for the Mikra Bikurim. Opinion number 2 says no. Mikra Bikurim, whether it's been done or not, that is not going to prevent the Kohen from eating. What is going to prevent him from eating is the Hanacha, right? The Hanacha of placing it down in front of the Mizbeach. Okay, so our Mishnah taught us that it was the Mikra Bikurim, which is the stage which is relevant. We then saw an opinion in the Gemara which said actually the opposite. Or we saw the Mishnah. The Mishnah said that it was the Mikra Bikurim, and that was the opinion of Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Akiva. Whereas Rabbanan said no, the Mikra Bikurim does not hold you back, but it's the Hanacha, it's the placing it down in front of the Mizbeach. So just quickly to recap what we saw yesterday. Our Gemara, if you look on Daf Yud Chet Amud Bet, we're about halfway down the page. There is a statement that says, Amar Rabbi Elazar, Amar Rabbi Yoshaya, Bikurim, Hanacha me'akevet bahen, Kriya ein me'akevet bahen. So this is the opposite. This is the opposite to what we saw in the Mishnah. Right? It's the other opinion. To say that with the Bikurim, even if you've not done the Mikra Bikurim, you've not read the Psukim, that's fine. The Kohen can still eat them. He shouldn't. It's not like a tchila, but b'diavad he's allowed to. There's no malkut. However, if you've not done hanacha, if you've not placed him down in front of the mizbeach, then there would be malkut. So that's hanacha me'akevet, kriya ein me'akevet. I'm going to skip a few lines now. I won't read through the whole thing we saw yesterday, but we'll skip a few lines to where it says, Rav Acha bar Yaakov madnei kedrabi Asi amar Rabbi Yochanan. In other words, this statement that we've just said of Bikurim, Hanacha Ma'akevet and Kriya Ein Ma'akevet, this Amora brings it as, he quotes it in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, that this is Rabbi Yochanan's opinion. Now here the Gemara says we have a problem, because Miyamar Rabbi Yochanan, Bikurim Hanacha Ma'akevet ben, Kriya Ein Ma'akevet ben. You're just telling me that Rabbi Yochanan says that it's the stage of Hanacha which holds the Kohen back from eating, and not the stage of Mikra Bikurim. But did he really say that? Because about a third of the way up from the bottom of the page, the bottom of the narrow lines, says Miyamar Rabbi Yochanan Bikurim Hanacha Ma'akevet ben Kriya Ma'akevet ben V'haba Mine Rabbi Asim Rabbi Yochanan Bikurim Matay Mutarin LeKohanim. But Rabbi Asi asked Rabbi Yochanan explicitly. He said, at what stage are the Kohanim allowed to eat the Bikurim? V'amarle, Rabbi Yochanan says, Haroyin lekriya mishakara alein, v'she'en royin lekriya misharau pnei habayit. He says, depends when you bring them, right? In other words, what's royin lekriya, not royin lekriya? Rashi says, yeah, haroyin lekriya me'atzeret ve'ad chag, as we've explained. This mikra bikurim, this reading of these psukim, only applies if you bring them from Shavuot until Chag Sukkot. After Sukkot until Chanukah, a person could still bring bikurim, but then the Mikra Bikurim would no longer apply. We explained why. I won't go into that again. So he says like this. He says, if you bring them in a time when you can do Mikra Bikurim, so Mishakaralem, from the time that you've read the Psukim, from the time you've said the Mikra Bikurim, that's when the Kohanim can eat them. Wait a minute. Didn't Rabbi Yochanan just tell me that the Kriya is not Ma'akev? Okay, so that's our stira. That's our first contradiction. Rabbi Yochanan just told me it's not the Kriya that stops the Kohen from eating. It's the Hanacha. And now we see that he says to Rabbi Asi, if you have the Mikra Bikurim, the Kohen can only eat them after the Mikra Bikurim. So that is stira. That is contradiction number 1 in the words of Rabbi Yochanan. But there's a second part as well. Because he says that's if you bring that's regarding Bikurim which were brought until Chag Sukkot. What if they were brought after Sukkot? V'she'ein royin lekriya, says Rabbi Yochanan, mishra'u pnei habayit. Then as soon as you've brought them into the Azara, as soon as you've brought them there, the Kohen's allowed to eat them. But Rabbi Yochanan, didn't you tell me that even though Mikra Bikurim is not Ma'akev, Hanacha is Ma'akev, meaning you have to wait until they've been placed before the Mizbeach. Now you're telling me not even the Mizbeach, as soon as they come into the Azara. So that is contradiction number 2. So Kasha, Kriya, Kasha, Anacha. Both of these are contradictions. Says the Gemara, and now the Gemara answers. Kriya lo Kasha. No. From regarding the Mikra Bikurim, that is not a kasha. Why? Rabbi Shimon, Rabbanan. Again, Rabbi Yochanan is an Amora, and he is quoting here the opinions of the Tanaim. So we saw that Rabbi Shimon was the opinion in our Mishnah already, who said that the Mikra Bikurim is going to be Me'akev, but Rabbanan hold that it's not. So you're saying there's a stira in what Rabbi Yochanan is saying regarding Kriya, regarding the Mikra Bikurim. Well, there's not. In one place, he's telling me the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. In one place, he's telling me the opinion of Chachamim. Right? Lo kasha Rabbi Shimon Rabbanan. And regarding the second kasha, hanacha, nami lo kasha. That's also not a difficulty. Why Rabbi Yehuda Rabbanan? One is the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, and one is the opinion of Rabbanan. What is the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda? This is regarding whether I require hanacha, whether I require the bikurim to be placed in front of the mizbeach in order to be able to eat them, or it's just enough that they come into the azara. So Rabbi Yehuda Omer, vehinachto zot nufa. We explained yesterday the word hanacha, the verb appears twice in the context of bikurim. So when it says again the word vehinachto, what does that mean? It just means something. Meaning we already know that you have to place them in front of the mizbeach. Why does the Torah write it again? So one possibility why it writes it again, says Rabbi Yehuda, is because zot nufa. That means waving, meaning that you have to take the bikurim and you have to wave them on top of the mizbeach. And here he explains, do you mean that it means tnufa means waving, or it means actual the hanacha? It already says vehinicho. Therefore, when it says vehinachto, teaches you something else. That is Rabbi Yehuda. Who disagrees with Rabbi Yehuda? Mantana de Paligale de Rabbi Yehuda, down the long lines. Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, right? It's Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, because he says, the Tanya lakacha kohen atena miyadecha, limed ala bikurim shetunin tnufa. He learns tnufa from somewhere else. Now notice something important. The Gemara, where it says Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov does not explicitly say that we learn from the word vehinachto that the hanacha over here is me'akev, right? That the kohen can't eat until it's been placed in front of the mizbech. That is not explicit. We're going to infer that, but Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov doesn't say that explicitly. All that he says explicitly is where he learns out the source from tnufa, where he learns the source of waving. So he learns it out from a gzara shava of the word yad regarding the kohen, regarding bikurim, and regarding shlamim. And therefore, he does not learn in the same way that Rabbi Yehuda does. Therefore, we assume that he is going to follow the opinion that v'hinachto, written a second time, means that it's going to be me'akev, means the kohen is going to get malkot if he eats the bikurim before that hanacha has taken place. But it doesn't say it explicitly, and we'll see why that's significant on the next Talmud. So Divrei Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, my time and Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, atya yad mishlamim. It says the Kohen will take it from your hand. Okay. Now the Gemara just gives us another detail regarding Tnufa. It says Makan Kohen Aflahalan Kohen Malanan Balin Afkan Balin. Meaning in both cases, it's who has to do this waving. It's both the Kohen and the owners of the Bikurim or of the Korban. How is that done? Meniach Kohen Yadav. If one places the hands under the other, and then they wave it together. Okay, so there we've seen in Rabbi Yochanan is just quoting simply both different opinions in the Tanaim. But what we've seen again is that there is a machloket Tanaim and machloket Amoraim regarding which stage of bringing the bikurim is the stage now which is me'akev, which is going to prevent the kohen from eating it, and he'll get lashes if he does it earlier. Is it from the stage of mikra bikurim, of reading those psukim, or is it from the stage of hanacha, of placing it down in front of the mizbeach? Notice that we know explicitly, we know which Tana it is who says that the kriya is ma'akevet. That is Rabbi Shimon. Now we've seen at length. Which Tana is it who is arguing with Rabbi Shimon, who says that the hanacha is ma'akev? Well, we understand that it's Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, based on what we extrapolate from what his opinion about a different halacha. But we've not seen a Tana who explicitly says that the Kohen would get Malkot if he eats from the Bikurim before Hanacha and not before Mikra Bikurim. And therefore, the Gemara is going to come back and ask that question again on the next daf. Who is the Tana who holds by this view? And we're going to explore it some more. Now the Gemara just takes a question from the other side. We're on the last line of Daf Yud Chet, right? It says, Amarava Bar Ada Amar Bi Yitzchak. Until now, we've been talking about the Kohen who's meant to eat the Bikurim. Just when can he do that? But the Zar, the non-Kohen, who is not meant to eat the Bikurim, we say Bikurim over the page. From what stage would he be chayav? Rashi says Mita Zara Ochlan, just like Tevel, the eating Bikurim would be chayav Mita Bidei Shamayim. At what stage do we say? Now, he's not allowed to eat the Bikurim at any point, meaning from the point that he designates them at all. But from what stage is he going to be chayav this onesh, this punishment? So answers the Gemara, Mishera open abayit, once they enter into the Beit HaMikdash, once they enter the Azara. Kaman, whose opinion is this? Ki haytana detanya Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Bikurim miktzatan bachutz, miktzatan bifnim, shebachutz haren kachulin lechol divrehem, shebifnim haren kehekdesh lekol divrehem. Right, we're on the top of Yutet Amud Aleph. Says Rabbi Eliezer, that if you have Bikurim, which are partially inside the area of the Beit HaMikdash and partially outside, so those fruits which are inside are considered inside, those which are outside are considered outside. And therefore, those which have entered are going to be the ones over which one would be chayav mita bidei shamayim. Obviously, the ones outside are still bikurim, and they still have a certain element of sanctity. You're not allowed to eat them, but it's not the full. It's not quite yet the full measure. Okay, so we are now on Yutet Amud Aleph 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines down. 6 lines down from the top. Amar Rav Sheshet. Bikurim hanacha me'akevet b'hen, kriya'in me'akevet b'hen. Okay, so again, this is what we've seen. This is the opinion. This is not the opinion of Rabbi Shimon in our Mishnah. This is the other opinion, which was seemed to be the opinion of Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, but we don't know any other. We said it now in the name of Rabbanan. But we haven't seen the Tana who explicitly says it, and that's why the Gemara is going to ask. We say Bikurim, when it comes to Bikurim, Anacha me'akevet b'hen, Kriya'in me'akevet b'hen. In other words, even if the person had not done the Mikra Bikurim, the Kohen would eat them, he would not get Malkut for that, so long as they have been placed down the Hanacha in front of the Mizbeach. Hanacha me'akevet. If they have not been placed in front of the Mizbeach with the Hanacha, then the Kohen would still get Malkut for eating them. So that is what Rav Sheshet says. Rav Sheshet, who is an Amora. Okay, so clearly, as we know, an Amora cannot argue against the Tana. This is opposite to Rabbi Shimon. So Amar Rav Sheshet, Bikurim hanacha me'akevet b'hen, kriya'in me'akevet b'hen. Kaman, who is he following? Which Tana is the one who says this opinion? We know Rabbi Shimon is the one who says the opposite, but who says like this? So answers the Gemara, Ki hai Tana, like this Tana. The Tanya Rabbi Yossi Omer, Shlosha dvarim mishum shlosha zkenim. It's a language which appears. Rabbi Yossi says, I learned 3 things from 3 different zkenim, right? The 3 halachot which you learned together. We're not going to discuss. The Gemara is not even going to mention what the other 2 halachot are, but it's going to mention one of the 3 which relates to our sugya, relates to Bikurim. The truth is, it only tangentially relates to Bikurim. The main thrust of it is learning about Meiser, but we'll see how it's related. So he says the following. He says, Rabbi Yishmael Omer. So Rabbi Yossi says he learned the following from Rabbi Yishmael. Yachol ya'ale adam maaser sheni bizman hazeh b'Yerushalayim v'yochleno. Says, you might think that a person could, by the way, get to this a little bit more later. There's a question throughout Shas regarding the sanctity of Yerushalayim, regarding the sanctity of the Makom HaMikdash. And we talk about sanctity, we don't just mean as an ephemeral concept, but we mean regarding certain halachot of one of the cases where this comes up. There are other factors as well. But for example, is one allowed to visit Har HaBayit nowadays? If we were to say, right, the reason to say, we don't have a Beit HaMikdash standing, but the reason why one would not be allowed to visit, to go up to Har HaBayit, to go up to certain parts, even those who do go up to Har HaBayit, the reason that they allow it is because there's an argument whether we know precisely where certain areas of the Mikdash were. Do we know that geographically, topographically, do we have the accurate information? And if you say that we do, then you know which areas you can avoid because you're not allowed to go into them. Others say no, maybe we're not sure, maybe we are sure, but we're worried that you may enter those places by mistake. Okay, and as I say, other factors as well, which I'm not getting into. It's not our subject now. But if you were to say that all of that is predicated on the assumption that there is still a certain element of kedusha on the Makom HaMikdash, if there was no kedusha, then there would be no problem going up. Okay, halachically. Also, in terms of different questions regarding different korbanot, I think we mentioned a number of weeks ago in this year. Somebody asked a question about korban pesach bizman hazeh, right? Is that a possibility? We'll talk about that a little bit more later. But so here the question is bizman hazeh, meaning in time when there is no Beit HaMikdash, but assuming that there is still a certain element of kedusha, an element of sanctity, then certain mitzvot which were required to be performed, maybe in the Beit HaMikdash, or not necessarily in the Mikdash, but in Yerushalayim, would they apply nowadays? So Rabbi Ishmael says, right? Maybe Maser Sheni, right, does not have to be eaten in the Mikdash. Needs to be eaten in B'toch HaChomot. Needs to be eaten inside Yerushalayim. Needs to be eaten b'kedusha. It's a different problem, right? For ultimate mate, how do we overcome that? Again, not our subject. But he says, is there a possibility that nowadays the chiyuv of eating Maser Sheni within Yerushalayim perhaps still applies, or the possibility, the fulfillment of that still applies? Maybe Maser Sheni is not dependent on Beit HaMikdash standing or not. It's dependent upon coming into Yerushalayim. Says Rashi, Yachol Ya'ale Adam v'chule Kasavar Kedushat Haaretz lo batla. He holds the sanctity was not cancelled, right, after the Chuban. It's still there. V'tzarich la'afresh masrot. And one needs to separate Masrot, Maser Sheni, v'kamar, Yachol Yalenu v'Yachlenu b'Yerushalayim b'lo pidyon. Again, the way that we do it nowadays we separate Trumot and Masrot. We have Maser Sheni, and we perform pidyon, meaning we transfer the kedusha onto a coin, onto some money. That money is then considered hekdesh. There's nothing we can do with it now, but then the fruits can be eaten normally. So he's saying, would you say that even Bizman Hazeh you would not do pidyon and you could come and eat them? So answers the Gemara, Vedinu. Okay, yeah, this is a somewhat unusual usage of the phrase Vedinu. Normally we're going to say Vedinu, and that's going to come and support that which we've just said. But here we're actually arguing against that. But we say Vedinu b'chol ta'un avad makom. In other words, we are going to learn from Bechor. Bechor, the firstborn animal, which also needs to be eaten in Yerushalayim, but not just that. The Bechor needs to come to the Beit HaMikdash. In other words, we don't have a situation where we could eat the Bechor absent of the Beit HaMikdash. So too, we'd say the same will apply for Maser Sheni. That is the first stage. That's the assumption, that we can compare the two. We're going to get to Bikurim in a moment. Just hold tight. So right, Ma B'chor V'dinu B'chor Ta'on Avad Makom Maser Sheni Ta'on Avad Makom. Just right, both of these things need to be, both B'chor and Maser Sheni need to be brought to Yerushalayim. Ma B'chor Eino Ela B'fnei Habayit, Af Maser Eino Ela B'fnei Habayit. Right, so just so too, B'chor only applies, can only be eaten when in the Beit HaMikdash. So too, Maser Sheni only when we have a Beit HaMikdash. Now the question is, the Gemara is going to say, can you really compare Bechor with Maser Sheni? Every time we have a Bameh Matzinu like this, we compare two cases. It's only when the two cases are equivalent. We've seen a number of times already now, Masechet, already in this Perek. If one of them has a certain chumrah that the other one does not have, who's to say that you can compare? So it says the Gemara like this: Ma'ale Bechor sheken ta'un matan damim ve'emorim legabei mizbeach. How can you compare? How can you compare Maaser to Bechor? Why? Because Bechor has got a certain chumrah which applies in the Beit HaMikdash, which is what? That it's got Matan Tamim, you need to sprinkle its blood. That it's got Emorim, that it's got certain inner parts of it that need to be brought on the Mizbeach. So since Bechor has those dinim, we can't compare it. And therefore, maybe there's still sad to say that Maaser Sheni could be eaten even without the Beit HaMikdash. Okay, so now says the Gemara, well, let's compare to Bikurim. Right, you can't compare to Bechor. Bechor is more chamor. Fine, we accept that. But what about Bikurim? So it says Bikurim yochichu. Right. In other words, just as Bikurim, right, can only apply, could only be eaten in the time when there is a Beit HaMikdash, so too we'd say the same thing about Maaser Sheni. And again, the Gemara says no, there is a certain chumrah regarding Bikurim that doesn't apply by Maaser Sheni, and maybe it's not approved. What is that? We're nearly halfway down the Yam. There's Mala Bikurim Sheken Teunin Hanacha. Right. So in other words, how can you compare to Bikurim? Bikurim have got Bikurim need Hanacha. Bikurim need to be placed in front of the Mizbeach. Okay, in a moment, we're going to get to. We'll see why we bring all of this again. The Gemara is bringing this whole discussion to try and prove the opinion that this opinion holds, that when it comes to Bikurim, it's the Hanacha, which is Me'akev, it's placing them in front of the Mizbeach, which is preventing the Kohen from eating them, and not the Mikra Bikurim. Right? That's what we're trying to prove. So we'll come back to and we'll mention precisely how we prove that. But for now, what is the main discussion? The question was, could you eat Maaser Sheni B'zman Hazeh B'Yerushalayim? So we first said no, because just like Bechor can't be eaten B'zman Hazeh without a Beit HaMikdash, so too Maaser Sheni. We said, Bechor has got a certain chumrah of Matan Damim and Emorim on the Mizbeach. So we say, okay, so learn it from Bikurim to Maaser Sheni. That just as Bikurim can't be eaten B'zman Hazeh without a Beit HaMikdash, so to Maaser Sheni. So we say no. And what can you prove from Bikurim? Bikurim also have a chumrah. They need to be brought and they need hanacha placed down in front of the Mizbeach. So says the Gemara, Talmud Lomar, Ve'achalta sham lifnei Hashem Elokecha. Watch the full pasuk. This pasuk we've discussed it previously. Achalta lifnei Hashem Elokecha makom asher yivchar shaken shmo sham maaser. Right, that's maaser. What we're talking about, the gancha v'tiroshcha v'tzorecha uvchorot bekarcha v'tzonecha leman temad lirad Hashem Elokecha kol ha'amim. So there it mentions maaser and it mentions bechor. So says the Gemara, ma bechor eino ela lifnei habayit af maaser eino ela lifnei habayit. Okay, just as bechor cannot be eaten without the Beit HaMikdash, so too maaser. Now here, what's the difference? This is how the Gemara began, by comparing Bechor and Maaser. The difference was, previously, we were comparing it based on a svara. We wanted to say we can learn out we can learn out the din from one to the other. We can say just as Bechor needs avad makom, so to Maaser needs avad makom, etc. And then we rejected that. We said because Bechor is a chumrah, which maybe not. Now we're saying no, there is a hekesh. You have it. It's not. We're not making this connection between the two based on logic. We're saying that they are juxtaposed together in the same pasuk. The pasuk mentions Maaser and it mentions Bechor. It's a hekesh. So what if one's more chamor than the other? That's now irrelevant because they are there together in the pasuk, and you have a straight hekesh, and therefore you learn the same din. Okay, but all of that we brought. We're going to go back to that right in a moment. But we brought that to prove Rabbi Yishmael is the one who said that regarding Bikurim, the hanacha is me'akev and not the mikra Bikurim. So how do we see from his words that it's the hanacha which is me'akevet and not the mikra Bikurim? So the simple answer is because he only mentioned hanacha and did not mention mikra. Right? When the Gemara said, when we said that Bikurim are going to be more chamur, and therefore you cannot learn Maaser Sheni, the din of Maaser Sheni, from the din of Bikurim, what did it say? It said Ma lebikurim sheken tionim hanacha. Right? The chumrah, the special chumrah that we have of regarding Bikurim is that they need hanacha in front of the Mizbeach. What about the fact that Bikurim has another chumrah? What about the fact that Bikurim also, you have to read these psukim, these mikra Bikurim, and that's going to withhold you from eating them, which we don't find by the other mitzvah? Well, seeing that that is not mentioned, that would seem to indicate that that's not something that's going to withhold. Right? So says the Gemara now as follows. It says we're about halfway down. The im ita, if it's true, what? If it's true that mikra bikurim is also going to be me'akev the kohen from eating, right? Im ita lifroch, then it should have said the following. It said mala bikurim sheken tunin kriya vehanacha. Why did it not say? How can you compare to bikurim, which require both kriya and hanacha? The fact that it did not mention kriya seems to indicate that the kriya here is not me'akev, and therefore we learn that Rabbi Shmuel holds the opposite of Rabbi Shimon. The Gemara does challenge this. Rav Ashi says maybe not. So Rav Ashi nehide kuva leika mitzvah mileka. Okay, even if you argue that the mikra bikurim is not going to be me'akev, meaning it's not going to withhold the kohen from eating bikurim b'diavad. Nonetheless, lekatchila, there is a mitzvah of mikra bikurim. Why does it not mention that? Right? Amar Rashi nehide ikuva leika mitzvah mileka. There is at least lekatchila. There's a mitzvah of the mikra that you should have done. So that should have been mentioned. V'leima mitzvah v'lifroch. So say that there is a right that bikurim has got a chumrah that you are required, right, even b'diavad to do the hanacha, and lekatchila you're required to do the mikra. So Elamar Rav Ashi says no. Therefore, the reason that it's not mentioned is not because of that; it's because of something else. Elamar Rav Ashi kevan deika bikurei ager dabai lemema asher nishpa Hashem lavotenu v'lo matzi amar lo psik alei. In other words, says Rav Ashi like this. Rav Ashi says the reason it does not mention mikra bikurim is not necessarily that you can learn. However, machloket, whether the fact that it says the fact that it just says mala bikurim sheken tunin hanacha, it just says hanacha and not it doesn't mention mikra. So one opinion is to say that the fact that it doesn't mention mikra means that mikra is not me'akev, right? And that's the machloket. That's how Rav Sheshet understands. Rav Ashi is saying no. Rav saying the fact that it does, the reason here that it did not mention mikra bikurim is because not every case where somebody brings bikurim includes the mikra, includes reading the psukim. One example, which he says, is the bikurim of a ger. If a ger comes along and he brings bikurim, he does not read the psukim. Why? One of the psukim is which Hashem promised to our avoteinu, to our ancestors, and he can't say that would not be factually correct for him to say that, and therefore he's not required to say those psukim. So that's what Rav Ashi says. Rav Ashi kevan deika bikra ger dabai lemema asher nishpa Hashem la'avoteinu v'lo matzi amar, and he can't say it. Lo psik alei means it's not one din that's always the same. Since it changes, therefore it's left out. Says Rashi. If you have a look, Rashi near the top of the page, near the top of the narrow lines, he says lo psik alei miu b'Yisrael afilu ikuva ikala meimar. But if it was somebody else, was Israel, was not a ger, you could say that even reading the psukim would be me'akev. It would hold one back. So again, we've seen the question of reading the psukim and the hanacha. We've seen that it's a machloket tanaim. It's also a machloket amoraim. You see here between Rav Sheshet and Rav Ashi. Now, going back to this braita that we just saw, right? The Gemara now asks a different question because we really seem to have skipped a stage in the limit. The Gemara was trying to prove that regarding maaser, there's no maaser bisman hazeh. It tried to learn it from bikurim. Tried to learn it from bechor, and then we said no, you can't learn it from bechor because there's a special chum. So we tried to learn it from bikurim, but we said no, you can't learn it from bikurim because there's a chumrah. So then it said okay, never mind. We'll learn it from the pasuk. We'll learn it from a hekesh. However, there is another stage which the Gemara could have used, which the Gemara usually does use, which is where you try and compare two cases, right? And you can't learn it from either one of them. You can't learn A from B, and you can't learn A from C because B has a chumrah and C has a chumrah. So then we say what's called a tzad shaveh. We've seen this limit as well. Where you say, okay, you can't learn it from B by itself, and you can't learn it from C by itself, but you could learn it from B and C together because the chumrah that B has C doesn't have, and the chumrah C has B doesn't have, and then we could learn it. So if I can't learn Maaser independently from Bechor, and I can't learn Maaser independently from Bikurim, but the fact that it's going to apply to both Bechor and Bikurim, then I could learn that across to Maaser. The Gemara did not do that over here. The question is why. So says the Gemara, "Velehadar dina." Right? In other words, go back and learn it. Go back and make this following argument. V'teiti b'meh hatzad. Right? Say, what about the common denominator in both of those? You can therefore go across and learn. And the answer is no. Mishum de ikala mifrach. That too. I'm going to skip that stage because that too could have been rejected. For that too, you had a pircha, which is this. If you wanted to say, look, Bechor has got Matan Damim and the Emorim, therefore we can't learn from that. But Bikurim does not have that, so we can learn. Bikurim has got the Anacha before the Mizbeach, but Bechor does not have that. So you can see from both cases, each one absent of the Chumrah of the other, you can learn to Maaser Sheni. Says the Gemara, no. Because Bechor and Bikurim both have in common a Chumrah, which does not apply to Maaser Sheni. And that Chumrah in common, what is that? That both of them have got, and both of them have certain halachot which are related to the Mizbeach. Says Rashi, Tzad Mizbeach, Zel Matan Damim, Zel Anacha. Regarding a Bechor, it needs the Matan Damim, the blood needs to be sprinkled. Regarding the Bikurim, it needs the Anacha, it needs to be placed before the Mizbeach. So therefore, you can't learn anything from Maaser Sheni, which has no connection to the Mizbeach. And that's why the Braita went to the Pasuk and went to make a Hekesh. So at this point, I just wanted to mention, again, I think we've mentioned it before, but there's a fascinating halachic discussion. Again, I'm not getting into politics, but it's a fascinating halachic discussion regarding whether one could build a Mizbeach and whether one could offer korbanot on the Mizbeach, on Har HaBayit, even in the absence of a Beit HaMikdash. And this is a question which was discussed going back 150 years or so. There's an entire sefer, Drishat Sion, which was written by Rav Kalisher, to talk about this in the early years of the Zionist movement, or before the Zionist movement maybe, depending how you count it, talking about encouraging people to come back and discussing the possibility. Rav Kalisher writes he has letters, has correspondence with the Khatam Sofer, and he has correspondence with Rabbi Akiva Eiger, talking about the possibility of offering up korbanot bisman hazeh. And where do we learn it from? We learn it from Sefer Ezra v'Nehemiah. And in Sefer Ezra v'Nehemiah, we're told, the Gemara in Chagiga tells us that there were 3 prophets who came up at that time of Shivat Zion. The last 3 Nevi'im, we know Chagai, Zechariah, and Malachi, were the last of the prophets. They came up, and the Gemara tells us, fascinatingly, that each one taught a specific halacha. Right? One of the halachot was that one was to show them the exact location of where the Mizbeach was to be. One of them was, I think it was to show the dimensions of the Mizbeach. And one of them was to teach that there is a halacha, and this is accepted halacha, that one can bring korbanot even when there is no Mizbeach, when there's no Beit HaMikdash, excuse me. So in theory, if one was to have, again, there are other obstacles to overcome. As I said at the beginning of the shiur, we're not so familiar with many of the halachot of kodshim, etc. There are places now, and there are people who do it. There are people who've made it their life's work. Machon HaMikdash in Yerushalayim, for example, but all questions in terms of tum'ah and in terms of how these things are done procedurally. But theoretically, if one knew where the location of the Mizbeach was, and theoretically one knew how to build the Mizbeach and had it over there, it seems that one may be able to bring the korbanot even before the Beit HaMikdash itself is built. This is what happened in the days of Ezra. When they started, they had the Mizbeach first, and they started offering up the korbanot, and before the Beit HaMikdash was completed. I am not suggesting, I know this show is being recorded, I know I'm on YouTube, I'm not suggesting to anybody to go and do this now. Please don't go and do this. Don't try this at home. As they say, there are other factors and there are other reasons, but just theoretically, in terms of the possibility of what we see here, just apropos the discussion regarding the Mizbeach, that the Mizbeach is what is required, what is ma'akev in order to bring the korbanot, and potentially before the Beit HaMikdash itself is built. But this is not, again, you can go and you can read it through Drishat Siyon, and you can see all the letters there as well. The conclusion is that it's probably not practicable in our days yet either, but a fascinating discussion nonetheless. Okay. Let's stop there. I think that's a good place for us to stop today, and pick it up tomorrow, just past halfway down the Amud on Daf Yutet.
Okay. Yes, you have to excuse me for the next weekend of it, because I shall be away.
Enjoy.
So much.
Thank you. Thanks.
Okay. Have a good day, everybody.
You too. Thank you very much. Bye.